The cameras were rolling at a regional entertainment showcase in Columbus, Ohio in 1993, when a member of the judging panel looked at 36-year-old Steve Harvey, who had just delivered a 12-minute stand-up set that brought a full auditorium to its feet, and said, loudly enough for the microphone beside the judging table to catch it, while looking at the person seated next to him rather than at Steve, "This kind of show won't last. Trust me." He said it the way people say things they want heard, while maintaining the technical position that they were not directing it at anyone. Steve Harvey heard it. He was still standing at the microphone. The audience had gone quiet in the particular way of a room that has understood something has just been said and is waiting to see what happens next. Steve Harvey looked at the judge. He held the look for exactly 3 seconds, not aggressively, not theatrically, but with the full attention of a man who has heard something precisely and intends to respond to it precisely. Then he smiled a different kind of smile than the one he had been performing with all evening. And then he said 7 words. Those 7 words, spoken into a microphone in a rented auditorium in Columbus, Ohio, to a man who did not look at him when he said them, became the first sentence of everything. But to understand what made those 7 words possible, you have to understand the 12 years that came before them. Steve Harvey was born on January 17, 1957, in Welch, West Virginia, the youngest of 5 children born to Jesse and Eloise Harvey. Jesse Harvey worked in the coal mines. Eloise Harvey taught Sunday school and raised 5 children in a house that had very little money and, as Steve has described it in interviews across 30 years, a complete and unwavering supply of presents. "We were poor," Steve has said, "but we were never alone. My mother was there. She was always there. There is a difference between a house with money and a house with someone who shows up. I grew up in the second kind." That distinction between having resources and having someone present took Steve decades to fully understand, and the gap between understanding it intellectually and knowing it in his body cost him nearly everything first. He moved to Cleveland in his early 20s. He had been encouraged by teachers, by family members, by a Sunday school pastor who told his mother when Steve was 7 years old that her youngest son had a gift for making people feel less alone in a room, and that this gift was going to take him somewhere. Steve had believed this, more or less, for the first decade of his adult life. He worked as a carpet cleaner, a U.S. mail carrier, a boxer in 3 amateur bouts that he lost 2 of, and an insurance salesman before he got his first open mic stage time at a comedy club in Cleveland in 1985. He was 28 years old. The set was 8 minutes. He memorized it and performed it, and the audience laughed at every beat he had planned, and also at moments he hadn't planned, which was the first indication that something was happening in that room beyond a rehearsed performance. The club owner offered him $50 and a standing invitation to come back. Steve came back every single week for 3 years. He was building something. He could feel the shape of it. He could not yet see its full dimensions, but he could feel the frame going up, and the feeling was enough to keep him at it through the bookings that fell through, and the shows where the audience was thin, and the nights when the $50 didn't cover the gas. He was building, and he knew he was building, and for 3 years that knowledge was sufficient. Then, 1988 arrived. His marriage ended. His apartment was gone within 6 weeks. His savings, what remained of them after 2 years of a financially unworkable arrangement, were gone within 8. He had $35 in a bank account he could not easily access, because the branch required a bus he could not reliably afford to take. He had a 1976 Ford Tempo, 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of professional dress items he kept in the trunk so he could look presentable for bookings, and a comedy career that was generating enough money to exist on, but not enough to live on with any stability. For 3 years, from 1988 to 1991, Steve Harvey lived in his car. He has described this period in interviews with a specificity that suggests he has never stopped carrying it. He showered in gas station bathrooms. He ate food from behind restaurants on the nights when there was no other option. He parked in places that were safe enough to sleep without being noticed. He drove to bookings and performed sets that brought audiences to their feet, and then drove back to the parking lot he had identified as a place to spend the night. He told the other comedians he was between places. He kept his clothes pressed. He was never, in that entire period, visibly homeless on stage. The audience never knew. He had a daughter, Broderick. He has never described in public fully what those 3 years cost him as a father. He has said only this: there is a shame in not being able to provide that is different from other kinds of shame. It doesn't just sit on top of you. It sits inside you. And you can't explain it to a child. You just try to be there. And being there when you're living in a car is its own kind of daily effort that nobody sees. What does 3 years in a car actually mean? It means learning which gas stations have the most reliable lighting at 2 a.m. and which ones have attendants who will not ask questions if you are standing at the sink for longer than a customer would. It means knowing which fast food dumpsters are cleaned on which nights, and which neighborhoods have parking lots with enough foot traffic that a man sleeping in a tempo does not immediately become a problem. It means developing a routine that is so deliberate and so practiced that it begins to feel, from the inside, almost normal. Not because it is normal, but because the alternative to normalizing it is despair. And despair is not something you can afford when you have a set in 4 days and you need to be able to walk on stage and make 300 people feel joy. Steve Harvey made 300 people feel joy, repeatedly, for 3 years, while sleeping in his car. He never told a single audience member. He never told another comedian on the circuit until years later. He told no one. He had learned, from his mother, from Welch, West Virginia, from the particular silence of a family that loved fully and quietly and without announcement, that the keeping of a thing to yourself while still carrying it forward is its own form of strength. Not denial. Not pretending. Something harder, holding the weight and moving anyway, without requiring an audience for the holding. He had a notebook. He wrote in it in the car by flashlight or by the ambient light of a parking lot. He wrote observations, things people said, the way a room shifted when a punchline landed correctly, the specific rhythm of a crowd starting to trust a performer. He was building vocabulary. He was building instinct. He was learning, night after night in parked cars in Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus, how human beings work when they are given permission to laugh. And the knowledge he accumulated in those 3 years in that car was knowledge no comedy club booker could have manufactured for him. It was the knowledge that comes from the bottom, from knowing what it actually costs to show up, from performing joy while carrying silence, from understanding that the gap between where you are and where you are going is measured not in talent, but in the willingness to stay in the car for one more night. He held on. In 1989, a man at a gas station in Cleveland, older, a stranger, someone Steve had never seen before and never saw again, looked at Steve while Steve was washing his face in the bathroom and said, "Son, God has a plan bigger than your pain. Don't mail that letter." Steve Harvey has mentioned this moment in interviews for 30 years. He has never explained what letter the man meant. He says he does not fully understand how the man knew. He says those 2 sentences, that specific man, that specific parking lot, that specific evening, are the reason he is alive to have had a career at all. He held on to them from 1989 through 1991, when things began, slowly, painfully, gradually, to change. By 1993, Steve Harvey was booked. He was earning consistently enough to live in an apartment again. He had a manager. He had momentum of the kind that is not yet visible as success, but is visible to the person inside it as movement in the right direction. He had survived things that had not been survivable for a great many other people, and the survival had added to his work something that cannot be manufactured by talent alone. The particular quality of a person who has stood on the edge of an actual end and chosen to step back, and who therefore knows, when he stands in front of a room, what the people in that room are carrying, because he has been inside versions of it himself. And then the judge at the Columbus Showcase said what he said. Steve Harvey stood at the microphone. He looked at the judge for 3 seconds. He smiled the other smile, and he said, "Then I guess I better get started." The auditorium erupted, not with polite applause, with the full-body release of an audience that has just heard someone say something that functions simultaneously as a comeback, a philosophy, a declaration, and a blueprint. The judge did not look up. The person seated beside the judge laughed, and then stopped laughing when the judge turned to look at them. Steve Harvey thanked the room, thanked the organizers, and walked off the stage with the unhurried step of a man who has already decided that this conversation is over and the next one has already begun. He walked to his car in the parking lot of that Columbus auditorium on a spring evening in 1993 and sat for a moment in the driver's seat. Not performing, not thinking about what came next, just sitting in the car, the same kind of car he had lived in for 3 years, now simply a car, with the engine off and the parking lot quiet, and the specific weight of a moment he had just survived, which was also the specific weight of a moment he had just won, settling around him in the silence. He thought about the gas station. He thought about the man he had never seen before or since. He thought about the letter he had not mailed, whatever letter that had been. He started the engine. He drove toward the next booking. But Steve was not done. He was not done in the sense that the next 12 years became the most extended and detailed possible answer to those 7 words. The Kings of Comedy tour in 1997 sold out 36 venues and grossed over $37 million. The Steve Harvey Show ran for 6 seasons on the WB network. Family Feud, under his hosting, premiered in 2010, and by its 2nd season had its highest ratings in 36 years of broadcast history. By 2015, it was the #1 syndicated game show in America. By every measurable standard, audience, cultural footprint, longevity, revenue, influence, the show that wouldn't last had not merely lasted. It had redefined the category it occupied, and alongside the show, Steve Harvey had built a media company and a mentorship foundation and a radio program that reached millions of listeners per week, and a book series and a presence in the culture that extended well beyond any single format. Each of these was, in its own way, a continuation of those 7 words. Not an argument, an answer. The judge's name has never been made public. Steve Harvey has never named him. In every interview in which he has been asked about the moment, Steve speaks about it with a specific, consistent generosity that is not the generosity of forgiveness exactly, more the generosity of someone who has understood something clearly and no longer needs to be angry about it. He wasn't wrong about what he saw, Steve has said. He was seeing a 36-year-old black man who had been living in his car 3 years earlier performing at a regional showcase. Based on what he knew and what he could see, his assessment was not unreasonable. What he couldn't see was what was coming. Most people can't see what's coming. That's not a crime. It's just a limitation. He stops. The only thing that would have been a crime was if I had let his limitation become my limit. 3 months after Family Feud's record-breaking 2011 season finale, a network producer sent Steve Harvey a handwritten note that said only, "Your show won't last long enough for us to cancel it. It'll outlast everything around it." Steve had the note framed. It hangs beside his office door, not above the desk, beside the door, so he sees it on the way out of the room, not the way in. On the way in, he has said, "I already know why I'm there." On the way out is when you need to remember, because the way out is when you carry it back into the world. There is something specific that happens to a person who has been dismissed and has decided not to accept the dismissal. The dismissal does not disappear. It does not cease to have been said. What changes is what the person who was dismissed does with the weight of it. Some people carry it as injury, as something done to them that costs them energy every day to hold. Some people set it down, which requires its own form of effort. The effort of letting go of something that gave you direction even while it was hurting you. And some people, the rarest, do something different. They carry it all the way to the end. They hold it every morning when they wake up, and every night when they work, and every day when something does not go the way it should. And they use it not as fuel in the way people mean when they say use your anger as fuel, but as compass, as direction. Every decision for 12 years made against the true north of 7 words. Not "I'll prove him wrong," that is still about him. Just get started. Keep going. The answer is the work. A year after the Columbus showcase, Steve Harvey went back to perform at the same venue. The woman who had organized that original event, a woman named Patricia, had booked him for 3 nights. Before the first performance, she told him that the judge had left the event early and had not returned for subsequent events. Steve nodded. He performed all 3 nights, standing ovation each evening. On the 3rd night, he closed his set with 7 words, with no explanation or context. Just the words, delivered with the weight they had accumulated in the intervening year. "Then I guess I better get started." Every person in the room who had been there in 1993 understood immediately. Everyone who hadn't assumed it was a standard closing line. Both interpretations were accurate. Today, the Steve Harvey Mentoring Program for young men operates in 12 cities and has served over 3,000 young men who have been told, in one form or another, by one voice or another, that the thing they are trying to build is not available to someone who looks like them or comes from where they come from. The program does not begin with inspiration. It begins with a question. Every young man who enters is asked the same question in the first session. What did someone tell you that you couldn't do? The answers are documented, and they are almost always the same. Too old, too young, wrong neighborhood, wrong skin color, wrong background, wrong school, wrong family. Steve reads a selection of these answers himself at the annual program dinner each year. He reads them without comment. He lets the room sit in them for a moment. Then he says, every single one of these was said out loud to a person who was still becoming. And every single one of these is a lie, not a mistake. A lie. And here is what I know about lies. They only have the power you agree to give them. And I am here tonight to ask you to stop agreeing. The program's foundational message, in Steve Harvey's own words, is this: 7 words. That's all you need. Not permission, not approval, not a different face or a different zip code. A decision. And then you get started. If Steve Harvey's 7-word answer to a man who wouldn't look at him, and the 12 years that made those 7 words possible, moved you today, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who has been told their vision is too large, their timing is wrong, or their category is not available to someone like them. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something that you went on to do anyway? Tell us your story in the comments. And ring that notification bell, because more stories about the decisions that change trajectories are coming every single week. Don't let a single one pass you by.